Well, I mean, it kind of depends on what compost that you want, or I guess the amount of space and what you want to do with the compost. I have a so messy over there. I have a three-tiered compost system that I built out of pallets. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pallets without any bottom. If you need a bottom, it wouldn't make sense to use a bottom because then like the delicious compost juice wouldn't go anywhere. It would pool. But the three-tiered compost system is good if you have a lot of space, but you don't have any machinery. Uh, the first stage, like you're supposed to fill up the first stage with nitrogen and carbon materials, and then like let it decay a little bit, let it get hot, and then turn it. And to make it easy to turn, you just turn it from one place into another rather than having to turn it in place, because that is like just means you're making a lot of body movements that you don't have to if you do it this way. And then there's a third tier because of course then you want to like continue to turn it, and by the end, which that's why I laugh because I'm like very bad at turning my compost. By the end you have like good usable compost, and then you can just shovel that into your beds. But there's some challenges with that too, unless you like tarp it and get it hot enough, or are very intentional with how you with the materials you put in. You're gonna spread weed seeds back on your beds if you use that compost. And so at some point we can do a video about some other versions of compost. But again, if you use like weed barrier and all of those methods of weed suppression that we talked about, then you can get to things early and still make it work. But that's a good model if you have, this amount of space. When I was living in a smaller house with a smaller yard and I just like really wanted to compost, I built a 5-gallon bucket vermicompost, which is like red wiggler worms, and you feed them kitchen scraps. And like the method was that I had a couple of 5-gallon buckets stacked together and drilled holes in them. So there's like drainage and the worms could move freely through bucket to bucket. And you like train the worms to move from one bucket to another. Not train, you just lure them with food. But then once all the worms are like lured out, then you have like usable compost left. um, so that was a fun small method. And then of course if you have a farm, then chances are that you're either like a gigantic farm if you have the machinery to use to make this kind of compost. But like they make them in huge berms alongside their farms, or in fields where they make multiple berms, because compost needs to age if it has manure in it. And often like farms that have these big composts have animals or truck in manure. um, and gosh, that doesn't even go into like the materials that you put into a compost. I like said nitrogen and carbon, but there's some particular ratios, and depending on what you're doing with the compost, like certain things that you should or should not use. Like, um, again, unless you're going to age it, you wouldn't want to use pine bark because it's too acidic, and then you'd have to um, add some alkali to your soil, like lime or gypsum or something. But